Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's video we're going to be looking at a pet build for those of you out there who like to have minions crawling around the screen up and down all over the place, dealing crazy damage and living forever. This is the Ritualist. The Ritualist is a shaman and necromancer build, and this one in particular is built with the intention of keeping our pets alive for a very long time. Down below you're going to find the Grim Tools link, so feel free to check that out if you want a more in-depth look at how this build operates, but I am going to give you all the high-level stuff that you need to get you moving and grooving with your very own pet-focused Ritualist. This build is very focused on three things. Number one is going to be your summon Briarthorn, number two is going to be your summon Blightfiend, and number three is going to be your Raise Skeletons. I know, it's super original to have a pet build have its main abilities be pets. There's other things going on in this build though that is going to buff those boys wildly out of control, and we'll talk about that too. Let's hone in on the easiest thing to collect though. You're going to want to start out with your Necromancer build tree because you can get these skeletons picked and raised up very quickly. They are accessible from the first tier with your Necromancer, and you can start dumping as many points as possible into this skill as early as possible as well. With Raise Skeletons, you are going to be able to summon 3 skeletons per cast, and they live forever, assuming that they have enough life to do so. These skeletons deal physical and vitality damage, and they come in a variety of different skeletons with the more points that you put into this ability. To start, your skeletons will be melee-focused skeletal warriors, and they are the squishiest and probably least safe of the entire option that you'll get. The skeletal warriors just whack things with bones, and that's why we love them. They're cute, they hang around, they do what they do. The more points you put into this, though, you will eventually get access to skeletal archers, which are the next tier up, and they are quite a bit more safe because they do deal a lot of damage from range and have the general amount of health that our previous skeletal warrior melee option does. After those guys, you'll unlock with the next tier of points your skeletal mages, who are also casting from range and do quite a bit of AoE damage with their spells and abilities. Fantastic guys there. Damage only increases with those summons. And then lastly, when you have the maximum amount of points into Raise Skeleton, you have a chance to summon skeletal, can't remember what they're called, but they're basically skeletal tanks. They are very big health pool melee tanky skeletons. They come with a shield, they come with their own form of melee weapon, and they will just stand there and crush things in front of them for ages to come. They are the coolest looking of the group as well, and they are my personal favorite just because of the tanky level. Now, when you select Raise Skeletons, you're only going to be able to summon 3 skeletons at a time. And the cap, unless we get our modifiers for this ability, is only going to allow us to summon 3 ever. So, once you pick up Raise Skeletons, you'll have 3 skeletons following you around all the time, but you'll want to take points into Undead Legion all the way up to the max, which is the first modifier for Raise Skeletons. Undead Legion reduces the cooldown on this ability because you will be summoning them quite a bit early on because they are squishy until we get a lot of healing for them. It's going to reduce the energy cost to summon them, which is also pretty nice, but more importantly, the more points that you put into this, you are going to increase the summon limit of your summon skeletons. So, at max points, 12 out of 12, you are going to get 5 additional skeletons on top of your Raise Skeleton button. You can only raise 3 at a time still, so there is a little bit of a delay in getting up to full strength, but you get 8 of them, and that is a variety of mostly archers and mages and tanks involved. Once you get to the max points into Raise Skeleton, it very rarely gives you the tiny squishy boys that you're used to in the beginning of the game. After Undead Legion, however, you're picking up Will of the Crypt, with the maximum points in there to provide them with vitality damage, buffing their vitality and elemental damage for those mages, giving them vitality resistance, which is fantastic as well, and it's increasing their armor by 90%, which is going to let them tank a lot of basic physical damage from your run-of-the-mill enemies. Making your skeletons as tanky as possible, as early as possible, is going to let them deal more damage more often. So this whole tree of abilities is a necessity and should not be overlooked under any circumstances. Now onto your shaman tree. The first summon that we are going to pick up over there is your summon Briarthorn. It is one of 2 summons that you can get with the shaman class, or if you want to call it 5 summons if you're gonna get technical on me, but 2 summons with the shaman class that come out in beast form, in actual pet form that we can control. They live, they attack things, all the normal stuff. That being said, your summon Briarthorn is available from 10 points into your shaman tree. So picking this up early is also very good. The Briarthorn is beefy, it is big, it is going to be dealing with a lot of the utility aspects of this build for your pets. So getting it early on is going to give you a bit of a tank in your pack to be on the front line with you as a distraction to keep your skeletons dealing damage and to keep all the bad guys off of them. This build is focused around having a big, thick front line of boys, including yourself and the Briarthorn, along with the Necromancer trees summon Blight Fiend. So basically it's Bash Bros plus player protects skeletons and they deal damage, thinning out the herd. But that being said, the Briarthorn itself, definitely the coolest looking summon baseline of any of the other classes in the game, and I think it's just great. It literally feels like a pet. You just feel like you could give him a little pat on the head and he'd be happy about that, just like a dog. I mean, the Briarthorn all the way. But the Briarthorn itself has big health. It has some abilities all of its own. It's going to deal physical and bleeding damage, and it also has physical damage retaliation built in there to do some damage when it gets hit. The first modifier for the Briarthorn is an extra ability specifically for it called Ground Slam, and it does exactly what you would think it would do, and it slams the ground. If you've seen the Scorpion devotion with all the spines that shoot out, it's basically that, except it's going to do physical and bleeding damage, stun targets for 3 seconds, which is amazing, and it's going to deal 80% weapon damage. It also forces enemies to target the Briarthorn more because it's going to generate additional threat, quote unquote. That's what it does. And that is just making it more aggro for enemies in the game. That being said, that's what you want it to do. It's a frontline tank partner with you, so the more aggro it generates, the safer you are going to be, and the safer your skeletons are going to be. The last modifier for the Briarthorn is going to be Emboldening Presence, and this is just an active passive aura that the Briarthorn is going to give off in a 15-meter AoE. It is going to increase all damage by 50%. It's going to add flat offensive ability, which is nuts, making sure that you can deal more damage and that your skeleton can deal more damage. And it is going to give you the one stat in Ultimate that is still super hard to come by in a huge chunk, and that is Physical Resistance. Physical resistance is not only very important for keeping your character alive, but finding that for pets is probably going to be more difficult than it would be finding it for your character. Because your character can get it from devotions, they can get it from gear, they can get it from abilities, they can get it from all sorts of different avenues, but pets can really only get it from gears and abilities. So that, in and of itself, makes it worth its weight in gold, just for having this big boy rolling around with us all the time, just like he was going to do anyway. This ability also gives you bleeding resistance just in the AoE, so it's another 30% bleeding resistance on top of everything that you've got stacked up already, and that is going to extend to your pets, which have their own resistances despite what you have on your own character. We also get increased retaliation damage, increased to all retaliation damage with this, but we don't end up taking a whole lot of focus for retaliation damage with this build, even though we may do that later on. I haven't decided yet, but being frontline, being tanky when it comes to this build is one of the reasons that the pets can deal so much damage and do so much work. It's just still in the process, you know? We are not even level 100 on this build, but it feels like it's a level 100 because it just absolutely feels unkillable, and that is how you want to feel when it comes to any type of build, period. I mean, if you like to play Glass Cannon, go for it, but I like to be immortal. Now, the last large summon that we are going to focus on, that we are going to want to put all of the points possible into, is the Summon Blight Fiend. Summon Blight Fiend goes back to your Necromancer side of things, and you can get this pretty early on. It is unlockable at 15 points in, whereas the Briarthorn is 10 points in. So we go Skeletons, Briarthorn, Blight Fiend, and then we have got our whole troop, and all we got to do is continue beefing them up with levels. So the Blight Fiend itself is only a 1 summon limit to begin with, and it has a big chunk of health, just like the Briarthorn, but it is going to be dealing physical and poison damage, along with acid and poison damage on some of its abilities. It also gets abilities through the selection of modifiers for the ability itself. So the Summon Blight Fiend is going to be modified by Rotting Fumes. Rotting Fumes is going to have an AoE around the Blight Fiend that deals poison damage, it generates additional threat, and it reduces your target's defensive ability by quite a bit. It looks like 93, and that's only 5 points in, and that's for 2 seconds. It's also got a 15% chance to fumble, and a 15% chance to impair aim of the target's hit, which is ultimately silenced and blinding enemies. So we're probably going to end up taking more points into Rotting Fumes because we want to reduce the defensive ability of enemies that are getting attacked on the front line by quite a bit, so that we can crit them more and so that our skeletons can crit them more too. And you know what? I actually had it backwards. The Rotting Fumes and the Blight Burst they sound very similar in description, but the Blight Burst is the actual explodey poison ability that the Blight Fiend has. This is going to be something that happens when the Blight Fiend uses it, and the Rotting Fumes themselves are just an active passive. Sorry, they are a passive that is constantly emanating from the Blight Fiend itself. Blight Burst is going to be a 10-meter target area, which is very big, and that is going to deal almost half of your weapon damage at 42% at level 4, and then it's going to deal acid and vitality damage along with poison damage. It's going to confuse targets for 2 seconds that are hit, which means they are going to walk away. They're going to stop hitting your pets and yourself to hit other bad guys. And Blight Burst is also going to generate additional threat. It is probably that your Blight Fiend will be the most tanky on the front line because it has the most ability to generate that aggro, whereas the Briarthorn only has it in one ability, and it's only going to do that ever so often. That said, there is a single modifier that you can, or a single point modifier that you can take for Blight Fiends. It's called Unstable Anomaly, and what it does is increase the summon limit for your Blight Fiend. It lets you summon 3 of them, and it reduces the cooldown of the ability by quite a bit as well, but it ultimately it only lets you use the Blight Fiend for 12 seconds. So essentially what you're telling the game is that you want to have more Blight Fiends for a limited period of time, whereas having just one Blight Fiend will let you have them infinitely as long as you can keep them alive, which is very easy to do with the devotions and the other abilities in this build. Now, with that being said, I think it is a good idea to talk about some of those abilities because some of them are active, some of them are passive, and they all work in conjunction to keep our boys as alive as possible. And you may have noticed during the video that our pets do not die pretty often. I mean, if our skeletons die, it's usually only 1 or 2 every couple of minutes, and not, you know, all 8 on a rotating 30-second interval, right? But that is because, number 1, on the shaman side of things, we have got Mogdrogan's Pact. This is an incredibly strong passive that makes both you and your pets much more tanky. This is ultimately for your character going to provide physical damage just right on the top, and you're going to get health regen and energy regen per second with those. You're also going to get a bonus to your pets, increasing their physical damage by about 70% at level 12, which is good. You always want to be able to have more damage on them because that's really their whole job. Next up, we're going to be picking up the modifier Heart of the Wild. You don't need any more than, I'd say, half the points in this, because what it's doing is increasing health by a percentage amount, increasing health regen, and reducing bleeding and poison duration. So it's got its uses, but really getting a 15% health boost to, you know, whatever's in the aura is probably all you need. I can't imagine going too ham on that ability is super important once you've hit that point. After that, though, you'll pick up Oak Skin, which is the final modifier, and you do want all 10 points into this because this increases defensive ability, increases armor, and it gives you piercing and aether resistance on top of everything else. At level 10, you're getting 36% pierce resistance and 25% aether resistance, which is pretty nutty considering how often you'll be just right in front of all of the damage. Oak Skin also increases all retaliation damage, so, you know, another argument to put focus into that type of damage. But for the time being, we'll talk about that later. The other ability that you want to pick up on the shaman side of things to keep your pets alive is called Wendigo Totem. You'll want the Wendigo Totem itself and the Blood Pact modifier for 2 different reasons. Number 1 is because it is going to heal you, and it is going to deal damage for you, allowing you to live longer. Also, it is going to heal your pets. The whole point of the Wendigo Totem is to keep us alive when we don't have a heal button available for all of our pets or our character. Wendigo Totem has a health bar, but very rarely is it ever going to be killed because you'll have so many other pets for the bad guys to focus on. There's no way they'll dive past all of it to hit the Wendigo Totem. On top of that, its abilities are, number 1, Mend Wounds, and that is on a 0.5 second skill cooldown. It's a 5-meter radius, which again is about half the radius of what our Blight Burst explodes to. So if you ever see your Blight Fiend pop off, basically think half of that for the wave of healing that comes from the Wendigo Totem, and that is 4% plus a flat 380 every 0.5 seconds. Our boys are clumped up quite a bit though, and they get this healing also a whole bunch. So it lives for 15 seconds, and if you imagine that everybody your character summons and your character are standing in that AoE for the full 15 seconds, that is what, 4% times 30? 4 times 30 is 120%. They're probably looking at close to 150 to 160% of health restoration if they manage to be in the Wendigo Totem AoE the whole time, which is really easy to do if you're in big boss fights, and it is, still easy enough to heal them all with maybe 3 or 4 pulses. If you're just clearing out mobs, the totem can be dropped. It's a very short cooldown at 5 seconds, so you can replace it all over the place anytime you need, honestly. It also comes with Life Tap, which is basically its ability to deal damage. It's, again, 5 meter target area, and it's going to hit for Vitality and Vitality Decay damage. We really don't need it for damage, but if you wanted to focus on totems to deal damage, I guess you could dump more points into that kind of thing. But the heal is what we're really after. Blood Pact is the modifier for it. That is going to also increase that vitality damage, and it is going to convert that damage into health. So when it deals damage, it is going to be vampiric in doing so, and it is going to increase vitality damage, bleeding damage, and vitality decay. It is just a buff for the Wendigo totem, and that is never a bad thing. Switching over to our Necromancer tree once again, though, we're going to be picking up the exclusive skill Master of Death rather than the Primal Bond skill over on the Shaman side of things. Master of Death is going to be increasing offensive ability by percentage. It's going to give a ton of flat defensive ability along with 25% vitality resistance to your character. The bonuses that it is giving to your pets are also going to include 50% to all damage. It's going to give them acid, vitality, poison, and it is going to convert 50% of their physical damage into vitality damage as well. That 12% offensive ability that you got will also transfer over to your pets, letting them crit more and deal more damage, and they're also going to benefit from that 25% vitality resistance that you get, making them very big, very tanky, all the way to the end of time. This is just ultimately going to be the type of damage that we're looking for in this build, and the stats are just more beneficial for what we're looking for. Primal Bond has some good stuff too to make your character itself more tanky, but the stats that it's providing to your pets are a little bit more offense oriented rather than the balanced version that Master of Death comes with. We'll also pick up Call of the Grave, which is an activatable ability increasing the crit damage, acid, vitality, poison, and vitality decay damage of your character, and it is going to give your pets 190% to all of their damage, along with 25% crit damage too. So basically what we're missing out on with Primal Bond, we're picking up with Call of the Grave and also Master of Death. This is why the Ritualist is just a very, very strong pet-focused class if you want to build it this way, and there's really so many options that you have to make your pets good. Lastly, on the Necromancer side of things, though, we have Bone Harvest. And Bone Harvest is a little bit unique in that you're not necessarily taking it for damage. So you only really need 1 point or maybe 2 into the base skill of Bone Harvest, but then you'll take about 7 points into Dread, which is going to increase the range and give the ability of flat vitality decay damage. It also comes then with a chance to confuse targets at about 27% at level 7. So you can send people running in all different directions when you hit them with your Bone Harvest. But more importantly, Soul Harvest is the last modifier for this, and that's where we want to throw all the points that we have for this ability. This is a 5-second duration. It is going to deal it's going to affect all of your pets while it is active, but that 5-second duration is going to be just as long as the cooldown for this ability. The cooldown as we have it right now is actually only 3 seconds because of some of the gear that we're rocking, so we have a slight cooldown with a very long duration, and our pets are getting more vitality damage and more 110% to all of their damage, which makes them beefy and a much larger threat to deal with because we've got this AoE damaging ability going out. doing some work for us, but mostly buffing the pets. Soul Harvest is the whole reason that we've got Bone Harvest in this build, and I just think it's too good to pass up. Now, there are a couple other honorable mentions for this build, mainly that being Savagery and the Primal Spirits on the Shaman side of things. Ultimately, those two things are just, you know, they're not entirely necessary. You can get rid of those points for other things if you'd like to, but I take them because, one, Savagery is used to activate the Cleansing Waters devotion, and two, Conjure Primal Spirit, just because it looks cool and I like having more attack pets on my front line. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Speaking of devotions, though, I am going to explain to you that this one is a little bit tricky, because this build actually uses 3 outer constellations. I'm pretty sure that's 3. But yes, it does have 3 outer constellations in Tree of Life, Ishtok the Spring Maiden, and lastly, the Light of Empyrean. All 3 of those devotions are used to buff your pets. Each of these devotions comes with their own level of tanky stats and bonuses for your pets, so all 3 of them will do everything that you need as well as what your pets need. And the abilities that come with them are all very, very good for keeping your pets alive and keeping you alive to stick around and deal as much damage as possible. It's actually fantastic that you can get all 3 of these and that they synergize so well together. So, that being said, let's sit here and talk about how to get all 3 at once. So, when it comes to actually unlocking the 3 of these devotions, the path that you're going to want to go onto is to start with our single point into the crossroads of red. That is your Chaos Tree. From there, you'll pick up Viper. Viper only has a 1 red requirement, and it gives you 3 blues with 2 reds on top of that. That means that you'll be able to pick up Tsunami from there, getting another 5 points into blue. You'll also pick up Hound for 4 more blue points, and then Panther for some blue points, as well as your first yellow points, your order points. From that, you'll be able to pick up Lion, which is going to give you another 3, along with some nice pet bonuses. Each of these devotions should have at least some manner of pet bonus. There are a couple that don't specifically, but they do still help your pets. So we go from Panther to Lion. After Lion, we are going to pick up Dryad, because Dryad's Blessing is incredibly helpful as well. Dryad's Blessing is actually going to be affixed to a Bone Harvest so that we can get a big heal, as well as a whole bunch of armor and reductions to bleeding and poison. The ability itself is just a heal button, 33% chance on attack, heal button when it comes to our Bone Harvest, which is on a very, very, very short cooldown. After we pick up the Dryad, though, we're going to move over to the Staff of Ratosh, which will be giving us 3 points into blue, 2 points into red. From here, we'll go on over to Ulo, Keeper of the Waters, which is 3 more points into blue, 2 more points into yellow. And that will basically open things up for our final 3. These guys do not provide any points into those, so they should all be unlocked at this time. And with your 55 points, you can get both the Tree of Life and Ishtok the Spring Maiden early on, and I would consider Light of Empyrean the last of the 3 that you need to worry about. That being said, your Tree of Life has an ability called Healing Rain, which activates on a 25% chance that you are hit, which is very often because you're right up front with your big boys. And that is a big AoE heal, it is a big AoE health regen, and it is a big AoE energy regen for you and your pets. It is insanely good, and just another heal for us to stack onto the pile and keeping our boys alive. Nature's Guardians is what comes with Ishtok the Spring Maiden. This is also a 25% chance when hit, so if you're keeping track, basically every 2 out of 4 hits will come with either a big heal or Nature's Guardians, which is going to give you a 25% damage absorption shield to your character, and to your pets it is going to provide physical damage. It is going to reduce targets' resistances by 18 for 5 seconds, and it is going to give them a whole bunch of offensive and defensive ability. Not only that, but it is going to forcibly taunt the targets that are your enemies at that point. Your pets will taunt them into only attacking the pets. That being said, when your pets are generating additional threat, they're gaining more aggro, but they still have to go past a certain threshold to physically taunt the enemies. Now, again, this one is going to force enemies to attack them rather than you, because that's the whole point. After that, though, you can pick up Light of Empyrean last. The activatable on this one is only a 20% chance when you're hit, but still, basically 3 out of every 4 attacks that you are hit with will activate one of these abilities, making things good happen. I almost forgot a word in that sentence, so you can tell me if you made it this far in the video and laugh at me. That's fine. I just appreciate you getting to this point. But the Light of Empyrean, it's on a 2.5 second cooldown. It is on a 5 meter target area, which is a little bit of a theme in this build if you haven't noticed, and is dealing a weapon damage, physical damage, fire damage, and knocking targets down for almost 2 seconds. It's also reducing the damage that they do for 3 seconds, so when they get back up, they're not going to hit you quite as hard with that first attack. It's pretty cool, and the fact that it couples so well in dealing damage while you are being hit is super interesting. I like all 3 of these devotions quite a bit. They might not be the flashiest, but as far as utility goes, they just work so well together. It's very, very nice. Now, in terms of gear for this build, I do have one set working overtime, and that is Goal's Malice. Goal's Malice is a chest piece, it is a medal, it is shoulders, and it is gloves. This all together is going to put points into Blightfiend and Briarthorn by 3 once you complete the set. It is going to increase the summon limit of Blightfiend by 1, meaning that you can now have 2 of them up all the time, and it is going to let you reduce targets' resistances by 28 for 2 seconds to your passive Mugdrogan's Pact. Not only that, you're getting a 12% attack speed on that passive as well, and that is going to let you and all of your buddies deal crazy amounts of damage. You do get an activatable skill too. Well, it's not technically an activatable, it is another summon. You get the Summon Eldritch Talon from this set, and that is basically a nuclear raptor that is following you around all the time with your big boys, dealing physical and acid damage, and reducing attack speed, casting speed, and poison and acid resistance for everything around it in a 10 meter radius. The nuclear raptor of the Chaos Gods is fantastic, and it is one of the reasons that this set is just unbelievably cool. On top of that, the gloves themselves come with a summon that you have a 100% chance on critical attack of summoning. The Eldritch Web Weaver is it's not invincible, but it only lives for 18 seconds. You can summon 3 of them if you get enough crits, and they deal physical and acid damage on their own. So your Eldritch Talon, your Nuclear Raptor, is buffing these guys just by reducing the resistances of the enemies all around it. It's buffing your Blightfiend, it's buffing anything in your kit that does acid damage, really. This also is going to increase the range of Bone Harvest, the gloves do, and is going to let 10% of the attack damage that you do with Bone Harvest convert to health. So it gives Bone Harvest some vampiric attack. It's also reducing the cooldown, like I said earlier, making it more spammy, and that means basically constant buff for your pets. Now the gloves and the metal, the mark, are the only things in the set that will specifically modify things. But Goal's mark, the metal, is going to add 500 poison damage baseline to your summon Blight Fiend. It is going to let it generate even more threat, which is going to increase the amount of aggro it takes from the enemies on top of what it already does, which is crazy amounts. It is going to convert all of the vitality damage that it does into acid damage, and then for your Briarthorn, it is going to add on flat acid damage and flat poison damage as well. So your two big boys in the front, well, three with this set, your three big boys in the front line are going to be dealing a bunch of damage and should basically be a wall of aggro that the enemies have a hard time penetrating. It is awesome how well this set works. On top of that, we have the Ravager's Bite, Mythical Ravager's Bite, which is adding vitality damage to Bone Harvest. It's adding even more vampiric attack, adding some bleeding damage to it, and it's converting all of the cold damage in the ability into vitality damage, which is much more important to our kit than the cold. Ravager's Bite is a 10% chance on attack that comes with this piece of gear. It's going to do a vitality damage, vitality decay, reduce vitality resistance, along with bleeding resistance too. This kit, I highly recommend going to look at the Grim Tools link because there's a lot of gear going on here. And I still need to get a new relic made up for it. And I just actually finished putting together the components for the helmet, which is the Circle of the Great Serpent, the Circlet of the Great Serpent, which is reducing the cooldown of Call of the Grave and adding even more acid damage to the Summon Blight Fiend. So, all things considered, there's a lot going on. I highly recommend looking into that if you're looking for a step-by-step guide for this build. But that is all the time I have now. Enjoy it. Truly, I hope you do. It is one of the most fun builds in the game and one of the most fun that I've had putting together. But that's it for me. I know that was kind of long-winded. Whew. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.